So now we want to focus on what is happening. Organ has happened by week 8, and now we want to go through week 9 until birth. So we have the working of the formation and the working of the placenta, which is a huge part of this time, and then we have the growth of the fetus, which will eventually be born at the end of the term. So let's go through that process. So the fetal period, we've gone from embryo weeks 3 through 8, and now fetal period is week 9 until birth. Now, so what we have here is the placentation. Think of the placenta, placentation, uh, process of forming this placenta. This placenta is a temporary organ that is going to play a significant role in supplying the baby, the fetus, with the necessary nutrients, oxygen and nutrients, and removal of waste that it needs to be able to maintain its viability and eventually um, become an individual that can live outside of the mother. The placenta is this temporary organ that it's going to connect mother to baby, right? And in an interesting way. So placentation, forming this placenta, occurs during implantation in the uterine wall, but the majority of the placenta's growth occurs during this fetal period, weeks 9 through 38, roughly 38. So these are the different parts that we would see. And the placenta, you can kind of see there, uh, part of this growing fetus, separated from the fetus, but part of the process that helps grow this fetus. The umbilical cord connects the center of the placenta to the fetus, umbilicus. We know it as the belly button. We're all born with one. That is the connection between the fetus and the placenta. It contains 2 umbilical arteries carrying deoxygenated blood away from the fetal heart to the placenta, because you're carrying blood away from the fetal heart, right? So we call that an artery, an umbilical artery. Remember when we talked about arteries and veins in chapter, what chapter was that? Chapter 18. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood towards the heart. So there's 2 umbilical arteries carrying deoxygenated blood in this case, because it's carrying blood away from the heart of the baby, because it's getting uh, its oxygenated blood from the placenta from the mother. So we have one umbilical vein carrying oxygen and nutrients towards the fetal heart. A little bit different perspective. Generally, arteries carry oxygenated blood, but in this case, because it's carrying blood away from the fetal heart, it is an artery, but it's deoxygenated. It's going to get, the blood is not getting, the blood is going to get oxygenated when it comes into close proximity to the mother's blood. Okay. So think about that. Remember that. It's an important point. The umbilical cord also contains soft connective tissue, has some which supports and insulates. Remember, connective tissue connects, supports, protects. And we also have this amniotic membrane. When the embryonic period begins, this blastocyst is implanted in the uterine wall. Chorionic villi penetrate the uterine blood vessels to form lacunae filled with maternal blood, merge into a single blood-filled cavity called a placental sinus. Mother's blood merges into this blood-filled cavity, placental sinus. Mother's blood is going to supply the oxygen and nutrients to the baby. Once placentation, the developing of the placenta has begun, we have the stratum functionalis, or the uterus is known as the decidua, which is a region of the endometrium that lies beneath the fetus, becomes the decidua basalis, the part that surrounds the uterine cavity, decidua capsularis. This is, you can see the picture there. There's the areas. We see the placenta, and we see the umbilical cord. And this, and you're going to have an interesting interaction between fetus blood supply and mother blood supply. So the placenta, very unique organ. It's not an organ like it, if we think about it. A placenta is an organ. Remember, an organ is a multiple tissue types working together for a specific function. But the placenta is an organ that develops both from fetal chorionic villi and maternal decidua basalis structures. So from the mom and the baby, you have this structure that is developed. The mother and the child sort of coming together, working together. The chronic villi are filled with blood vessels carrying fetal blood, surrounded by maternal blood in the placenta sinus. But the blood does not mix, which is very interesting. So it's not mom's blood flowing into the fetus. The blood does not mix, even though their bloods come into close proximity with each other. There is a placental barrier, see here, composed of basal membrane, thin layer of that zinc cytotrophoblast, keeps the blood separated. But what can happen, similar to what happens in our capillaries in our body or in our lungs, we can have transfer of gases and specifically oxygen, and nutrients can diffuse even though blood supplies don't mix. So oxygen and nutrients diffuse from maternal blood into fetus for transport to tissues. Waste diffuses from fetus to maternal blood for removal. So we have diffusion from between maternal and fetus blood, but their actual blood supplies stay separate. Very important. So we have this placental barrier, diffusion of oxygen. Mother breathes in oxygen. That oxygen transports to her bloodstream, goes to her left atria, left ventricle, gets pumped through her body, goes to this maternal blood in the placental sinus. That oxygen that mom has breathed has inhaled, that's in her oxygenated blood, then can transfer to the fetal vein, which then will bring blood towards the fetal heart. See that picture, see that big picture. And this kind of describes that blood flow. Oxygenated blood flows to the decidual basalis of uterus through maternal arteries into the sinus. Maternal blood touches placental barrier, diffusion of substances, but not the blood cells. Diffusion takes place, maternal blood, which is deoxygenated and carrying waste, flows into maternal veins, back to the mom, back to the heart, mother's, well, back to the mother's cardiovascular system, eventually to her heart. Deoxygenated fetal blood leaves fetus and enters two umbilical arteries, flows into placenta, moves into fetal capillaries and chorionic villi on the fetal side of placental barrier. And that's where it can pick up the nutrients and delivers waste by diffusion. A key factor that helps this process is the fact that fetal hemoglobin has a greater affinity for oxygen than maternal. Because you may be wondering, well, how does oxygen diffuse from the hemoglobin in the red blood cells, the erythrocytes in the mother, to that of the child? Well, there's a greater affinity for oxygen in the fetus hemoglobin, erythrocyte red blood cells. And so it has a greater affinity to pull the oxygen. Oxygenated blood leaves the placenta, flows back to the fetus through single umbilical vein, right? So oxygen is pulled from the mother's hemoglobin and then goes to the back to the fetus through the umbilical vein. In addition to nutrition, the placenta also acts as an endocrine organ, so it can make hormones. Remember HCG, very important to prevent menstruation from happening. But the placenta makes that HCG, which we can test to tell us that we're pregnant. But that HCG prevents the menstrual cycle from happening, keeps that endometrium nice and thick, which is good for the fetus. This also results in the reduction of the syncytiotrophoblasts. I'm gonna get that word right eventually by the end of all this. The placenta also produces human placental lactogen and placental prolactin, which prepares the mammary glands. And if you notice, women who are pregnant with child start to get more developed mammary glands as their body is preparing for the birth of the fetus. Also, relaxin, very important. You have this fetus growing inside of this woman. Relaxin is produced, which relaxes, very, very simple naming process here, relaxes the body's muscles and joints and ligaments, eventually for the purposes of allowing things to be relaxed enough so that they can open up enough so that the baby can be born. There are many ways that things can be complicated, as you have already probably made note of, but one way is the placenta attaching to the inferior portion of the uterus, so near the covering of the cervix, and this could be obviously problematic. One way to circumvent this placenta forming in a bad spot per se, is to do a cesarean section. Now we have fetal development, which is right after, well, the placenta is developing, but we also have fetal development, which is happening. Very important. How does this fetus develop into a child, essentially, from the point of 9 weeks to 38 weeks? So, fetal development is characterized by the maturation of tissues. Remember, we already have had organ genesis, but these organ systems, tissues need to further mature and develop. And this happens rapidly. Remember, we started from sperm and an egg. Each one had half the chromosomes. And now, from point zero, or at the starting line, and now 38 weeks later, at the finish line, we have a complete functioning human being. That's not that much time for a significant amount of development, if you think about it. You cut yourself and it might take a week to heal. In that same time, a baby can uh, grow, a whole organ system. So it's a relatively quickly and dramatic development, right? Babies generally, uh, by the, they start off as this single-celled organism. By the time they're born, they're 7 to 8 pounds in weight. That's a significant increase, over 1,000 times the size of what they started off as. Amazing. All right, so what's happening? Month 3, body lengthens, eyes are well developed, but on lateral side of the head, eyelids are fused. All right, so the eyes aren't open yet. External ears are present, but not prominent. Genitalia is distinguishable. We can say if they're male or female by the 3rd month. By month 4, body growth is rapid. Lower limbs, your legs lengthen, joints are forming. Fetus has nipples and some hair. Kidneys are formed, develops reflexes, will startle and turn away from loud noises and bright lights. By month 5, growth slows, hair grows on the head. Formation of brown fat helps with the heat production after fetus is born. Mother can start to feel these movements, which is pretty cool. If you've ever been pregnant or cut somebody's belly who's pregnant, it's pretty cool to feel the fetus move. This is a picture. Month 3, month 5. You start to see the structure, the child come into form. Month 6, fetus gains significant weight. Eyebrows and eyelashes appear. Eyelids partially open. Skin is wrinkled and translucent. Lungs begin to produce surfactant. Month 7, eyelids open. Fetus turns upside down. Month 8 and 9, fetal neurons form networks. Blood cells form in bone marrow. Digestive and respiratory systems complete development. Approximately 266 days after fertilization, fetus is considered full term and ready to be born. Scalp usually has hair, fingers and toes have well-developed nails. 266 days, we've gone from a single-celled organism to a structure, a, 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 a baby that can live outside of its mother. Being born before that time could be considered premature if it is born more than 3 weeks before full term. The risk you have is tissues and organs may not have developed completely. Fetal circulation and cardiovascular system change rapidly soon after birth to adjust to life without the placenta. Remember, during the in the uterus in the womb, um, that blood supply, the umbilical veins are carrying oxygenated blood towards the heart of the fetus. Oxygen and nutrients are coming from the placenta and ultimately from the mother. But now it needs to be able to live without the placenta. And so the cardiovascular system has to change after birth. Right? So we need to now pump our own blood and oxygenate our own blood and deliver that to the body. So we have these unique cardiovascular structures present during prenatal development include umbilical arteries, umbilical vein. Remember, umbilical arteries carry deoxygenated blood toward the placenta, away from the heart of the fetus. Umbilical veins carry oxygenated blood towards the heart of the fetus. And we have three circulatory shortcuts called vascular shunts. This is the ductus venosus, allows blood from the umbilical vein to bypass the liver, connected to the inferior vena cava and flows into the right atrium of the heart. The foramen ovale hole in the interatrial septum between the atria that directly connects the right and the left atria, allows blood to skip ahead and avoid pulmonary circulation. We don't need pulmonary circulation if our blood is not being oxygenated by our own lungs. Therefore, fetus have the hole to allow blood to skip pulmonary circulation. We also have ductus arteriosus, a short passage that connects the pulmonary trunk to the aorta. Allows blood to move from pulmonary trunk directly into aorta without having to go through the left and right, the left atrium, left ventricle. Okay, some shortcuts. After birth, these shunts and umbilical vessels close, and normal circulatory pattern begins within a year in most infants. Normal circulatory. So we have these shortcuts in place because we don't need to oxygenate our own blood as a fetus. And so we can put these, so these shortcuts can be in place. But after birth, now blood from the right atria needs to go to the right ventricle, needs to be pumped to the lungs, get oxygenated, and then go to the left atria, and then to the left ventricle, and then pump through your aorta and your systemic circuit. That needs to happen in that way after you're born, because you're no longer getting oxygenated blood from the mother. If that makes sense. So that is that diagram there. All right. So the shortcuts are cut out. And that's the big picture of from fertilization, the zygote, blastocyst, the embryo, the fetus, the birth. All right, so pregnancy and childbirth. So uh, this period in the mother's life is one of the most dramatic periods in a mother's life. We divide it into 3 month long trimesters. So you don't need to know all these details, but just a few. So the first trimester, first 1 month, 1, 2, and 3, 12 weeks, you know, uh, all pre-embryonic and embryonic developments completed, fetal development begins. But so by the end of the first trimester, all major organ systems are present. You have organogenesis that happened. It's the most critical stage of development. This is also where it's most likely a spontaneous abortion or miscarriage will take place because you have so many things developing, initially developing. After this point, they're further growing and becoming more defined, but they're in their place. Many women get morning sickness, fatigue, and other symptoms during this first trimester. Second trimester, fetus continues to grow and develop. Pregnancy becomes obvious. You can see it as the uterus and the abdomen expand. They start to feel this growing fetus. Third trimester, fetus grows rapidly, gains significant amount of weight. It's where it can start to bother the back aches, pressure on internal organs. Hear women say, "I'm ready for this baby to come out of me." Starts to get very uncomfortable. That is the internal changes. You also have hormonal changes. Remember, you have the HCG. After that, blastocyst implants in the uterine lining. You have the secretion of this ACG, maintains the corpus luteum so that it continues secreting estrogen and progesterone. Stratum functionalis continues to grow and develop. Hormones stimulated by ACG inhibit FSH and LH, so stops that normal reproductive cycle, stops the menstrual cycle. The HCG declines after about the 4th month. At this time, corpus luteum is no longer needed because placenta secretes the estrogen, progesterone, and maintains the uterine lining. Hormones are very important in this process. Placenta also secretes other hormones. Human placental lactogen prepares your mammary glands to secrete milk, you see development in the woman's breast, melanocyte stimulating hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, right? So these both play a role in darkening the area around the breast, and then also for the CRH, uh, determining the length of the pregnancy, timing of childbirth. Aldosterone, another hormone, increased blood volume during pregnancy. Remember, oxygen, nutrients are going to the baby. So we want to increase that blood volume by promoting reabsorption of sodium ions from kidney tubules. Parathyroid hormone helps to maintain high concentration of calcium ions because fetal's demand for calcium is high to support bone development. Remember, it's getting all of these things from mom. So mom needs to produce more. Prolactin stimulates milk production by the mammary glands. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions and allows milk release from the mammary glands. You also have some other changes that happen. The reproductive system, the uterus enlarges greatly over the 9 month pregnancy, which makes sense because it has the baby growing inside of it. Eventually extends upward to reach level of xiphoid process of sternum. So stands pretty high. Before the pregnancy, uterus is about the size of a fist. By 4th month, uterus fills pelvic cavity, has begun to push into abdominal cavity. Bulk of uterine enlargement is not because of developing fetus. It is due to hypertrophy of myometrium, placental growth, and accumulation of amniotic fluid, which protects this fetus that it is holding. In the last few weeks of the pregnancy, estrogen promote formation of gap junctions between uterine muscle walls to facilitate coordinated contractions during childbirth. At 28 weeks, uterus reaches above umbilicus. As uterus continues to expand, abdominal organs are displaced. Compressing diaphragm exerts pressure on the urinary bladder. You may find women will have to go to the bathroom much more often. Glandular tissue grows, additional alveoli develop under influence of prolactin. Cardiovascular system, growing placenta requires increased blood volume. Need more blood because you're losing oxygen and nutrients. You're sending oxygen and nutrients to the fetus. So as offspring grows, need more oxygen. Also, we need more waste to produce that must be removed. So mother's blood volume, cardiac output increase, blood pressure may rise. Makes sense. As uterus grows and presses on pelvic blood vessels, venous returning from lower limbs may be impaired. Could have some issues there. Pregnant women generally have a lower hematocrit, number of erythrocytes, so their blood thins slightly, decreasing their resistance and minimizing their rise in blood pressure. Our respiratory system in the pregnant mother, more oxygen is needed, more carbon dioxide is produced, right? So progesterone makes medullary respiratory center more sensitive to carbon dioxide, stimulates removal of more carbon dioxide from blood by increasing the rate and depth of ventilation. More breathing. So they can generally they're going to get tired quicker. They got to breathe more. They have to breathe in more oxygen, breathe out more carbon dioxide. So they're going to feel like almost like a shortness of breath, and they weigh more because they have this baby growing inside of them. So they're going to feel more tired, have more shortness of breath, less aerobic capacity. Digestive system, obviously, you're going to need more calories to feed this growing child, right? So, increased intake of food, water retention, growing fetus leads to weight gain. Average weight gain is about 28 pounds, 28 to 30 pounds. Okay. They need an extra 300 calories a day. That's that women start craving things when they are pregnant. And the urinary system is affected as well. The fetus produces waste. So the mom not only has her own waste, but also the waste from the fetus. So glomerular filtration rate can rise by 50%. So not only will she have to go to the bathroom more because the fetus is resting on her bladder, but that fetus is also producing waste, and she has her own waste. So she's going to have a need to go to the bathroom more and more and more. You can read through the slide on preeclampsia. Um, uh, but and try to understand that you don't have to know this for purposes of our testing, but I did highlight some things that are uh, important or good to know. And then we have what is called childbirth, parturition. So pregnancy ends with childbirth. Fetus is expelled from the uterus through the vagina. Right? And the series of events that happen we call child labor or labor. Takes place at the end of the 38 weeks. Generally, it can happen a little bit earlier or a little bit later. That's generally what happens. All right. So fetal adrenal cortex produces cortisol, binds to receptors on the placenta, and stimulated to produce large amounts of estrogen. High estrogen level stimulates uterus to form oxytocin receptors on myometrium. Those high estrogen levels also override quieting influence of progesterone. Myometrium becomes irritable. Remember, up until this point, that myometrium wants to stay there, but now it becomes irritable, leads to these contractions, Braxton Hicks contractions. Both the fetal hypothalamus and maternal hypothalamus secrete oxytocin, which stimulate the placenta. It secretes prostaglandins, start to dilate the cervix, which we can actually measure. The doctor can measure that dilated cervix. Your 1, millimeter, 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, along with oxytocin, increased strength of uterine contractions, right? As the head of fetus pushes on and stretches the cervix, more oxytocin is released. As it's released, the myometrium contracts more forcefully. Placenta secretes more prostaglandins, cause cervix to stretch more. Remember that baby is head down, coming out. It's supposed to be head down, coming out. During pregnancy, rising levels of progesterone leads to the formation of a mucus plug at the cervix. But when the cervix begins to dilate, that plug is discharged to the vagina. Labor may begin within hours after the mucus plug is discharged. It may not occur for up to a couple of weeks. They can induce labor different ways. That's a picture. And we have the labor, which can be broken down into 3 stages: dilation, expulsion, and placental. Dilation, onset of labor, until cervix is fully dilated at 10 centimeters. This is the longest stage. The thing I want you to remember here is, besides that, it's the longest stage. At some point, the amnion fluid that ruptures, we have that amniotic fluid that is surrounding the baby. It ruptures, and so we have what is called the water breaking. Right? Expulsion stage, from the time of full dilation to delivery, could take up to a few hours, minutes, depending on how fast this happens. Cervix is fully dilated, mother voluntarily contracting, pushing down, fetus head distends vagina, start pulling them out. As long as the fetus is in a vertex or head first presentation, skull, the baby's head will push right on the cervix, cause more dilation. Body can be delivered right out. Sometimes they come out in a different position. It can have other problems. We can also do a cesarean section, cut right in through the abdominal and uterine walls, and remove the baby that way. Right? So that's how the baby comes out. And then the placental stage. So after delivery of the newborn, the placenta, fetal extraembryonic membranes, known as afterbirth, are delivered. It takes about 30 minutes without assistance. Remember, the placenta is an organ that is needed when the baby is growing. Then afterwards, it really has no use. So complete removal of the placenta is important to stop uterine bleeding. Remember, mom's blood is coming to the placenta, so we got to get rid of that. Um, and remove from the body. So now mom is no longer pumping blood to a placenta, to something that was supposed to be going to the baby. That whole flow can stop. And that's it. That's all we need. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, email your professor.